It was an ordinary day, at least it seemed like one. But Maya Freeman, a 13-year-old girl with a heart full of excitement, was about to walk into Meridian Financial Bank with an ambition that would unknowingly shatter her perception of fairness and trust. This story sheds light on the issues of racial prejudice, stereotyping, and the power of standing your ground. Don't miss this eye-opening moment and powerful message about overcoming judgment and embracing your worth. And if it's your first time here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Show some love by liking the video. She wasn't just depositing money. No, this day was far more significant. This was her first time handling her own savings, a monumental step toward financial independence. She had earned every dollar of the $5,000, math scholarships, birthday gifts from family, and the pride of knowing that she was learning the importance of financial responsibility from her father, the chairman of the very bank she was stepping into. Maya's shoes, sneakers that had seen many days of school and play, weren't those of someone trying to impress. She didn't need to. This money was hers. But Maya didn't know that on this day, her bank visit would not be the exciting milestone she anticipated. Instead, it would be a lesson in humiliation, suspicion, and discrimination. As she stood in line, clutching her thick envelope, Maya noticed something strange: the way customers were treated. A businessman in an expensive suit walked in and was whisked away to the VIP room without a second glance. An elderly Asian couple was barely acknowledged, dismissed with a wave toward the seating area, as if they were a burden. Then came a Spanish man, simply trying to cash a check, yet he was grilled with questions that others before him hadn't faced. Maya watched as each interaction revealed a pattern. Customers of a certain race were given VIP treatment, while others were met with cold indifference, or, worse, suspicion. As Maya approached the counter, her heart raced, not because she was nervous, but because she was starting to sense something wasn't right. She had waited patiently for her turn, longer than others, and now when she stepped up to the counter, ready to deposit her hard-earned money, she was met with a cold stare. The teller, a woman named Beth, didn't greet her with a smile. Instead, her gaze fell on the envelope Maya was holding and then shifted to Maya with an icy look of judgment. "Where did this money come from?" she asked, her tone flat and dismissive. Maya paused, confused. Why would the teller question her money? She was simply there to deposit it, as she had been taught. "It's from a math scholarship and birthday gifts," Maya replied, trying to sound calm and composed. But the teller didn't respond immediately. Instead, Beth turned to a senior teller named Mark, who seemed just as skeptical. As Mark walked over, Maya's unease grew. Why was this happening? Why was her money being questioned when others weren't treated this way? The moment Mark laid eyes on Maya, his expression shifted, a subtle sneer creeping onto his face. "This seems a bit much for you," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Maya tried to explain again, but his dismissive glance said everything. To him, a black girl like Maya didn't belong in the bank, certainly not with that much money. The insult cut deeper than she realized. She had done everything right, studied hard, earned scholarships, been responsible. But now, in the very place where her father worked, she was being made to feel like a criminal. She couldn't help but feel the sting of the discrimination that was unfolding before her eyes, all because of her race. It was like being caught in a storm that she couldn't escape, and the worst part was, it wasn't just happening to her. It was happening to others too, in subtle ways that no one seemed to acknowledge. Maya didn't want to cause trouble. She simply wanted to make a deposit, to take another step toward her independence. But instead, she was being scrutinized, treated like she was somehow less than, because of who she was. As she stood there, her mind raced, her heart pounded, and something inside her began to shift. She wasn't going to let this slide. Not today. Not in her father's bank. The tension in the air thickened as Maya stood at the counter, her heart pounding louder with every passing second. The humiliation she felt was unbearable, but she refused to let it show. She stood tall, her hands gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. Why was she being treated this way? Why was her money under scrutiny when everyone else had walked through the doors with ease? She had never imagined that something so simple, something as innocent as depositing her savings, could become a battleground. Mark, the senior teller, crossed his arms and tilted his head, inspecting her as though she were a mystery to be solved. He couldn't hide his disdain, not even if he tried. Maida's stomach churned as his gaze lingered on her, as if the color of her skin somehow disqualified her from possessing something of value. His eyes flicked back to Beth, a silent exchange passing between them. The message was clear. This was no ordinary transaction, and this young girl was no ordinary customer. This was an opportunity to prove something, to reinforce the unspoken hierarchy that they had built in their minds. Maybe someone asked her to deposit it for them, Mark muttered, his words intended to be quiet but loud enough for Maya to hear. She recoiled. How dare he? The audacity of the assumption hit her like a slap across the face. She wasn't just being judged, she was being dehumanized. She wasn't an intelligent young girl who had earned her money. No, to them, she was just a black child who couldn't possibly have come into that amount honestly. That's not true, Maya said, her voice steady but firm, despite the rising anger in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the other customers on her now, some curious, some uncertain, others pretending not to notice. It felt as though the entire lobby had become a stage where she was the only one being scrutinized. Beth didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes said enough. She was no better than Mark. Both of them were complicit in this silent racism. Maya had expected a smooth transaction, a simple deposit, not an interrogation that made her feel like a criminal. But here she was, in her father's bank, being treated like an outsider. Her mind flashed to her father, Frederick Freeman, the chairman of Meridian Financial Bank. She had always admired him for his calm demeanor, for the way he treated everyone with respect, regardless of their background or status. She had always believed that his bank was a place where fairness and transparency were more than just slogans. But now, in the very building he ran, she was seeing the ugly truth behind the polished facade. As she stood there, struggling to maintain her composure, she felt the weight of the moment. She realized that this wasn't just about her. It was about every black child who had ever been underestimated, every person of color who had been judged before they even had a chance to prove themselves. This wasn't a simple case of bad customer service. It was a reflection of a much deeper issue. It was a system that, without even realizing it, had placed limits on who was allowed to succeed and who wasn't. Just as she was about to speak again, to demand that they treat her like any other customer, Mark leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Maybe it's dirty money," he said, loud enough for Maya to hear. Someone's probably pulling the strings behind her. Maya felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. The words echoed in her mind. Dirty money. It was as if her very existence, her accomplishments, her family's legacy, everything, had been reduced to something filthy in their eyes. She wanted to shout. She wanted to scream. But instead, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had to remain calm. She had to rise above this. "This is my money," Maya said, her voice now sharper, unwavering. She refused to let them push her around it any longer. She had worked too hard, earned too much, and was too proud of what she had achieved to let these people diminish her worth. Mark's response was to snicker, and that was when Maya realized just how deep the problem ran. It wasn't just about money or status. It was about race. In their eyes, a black girl like her simply couldn't belong in the same space as them, couldn't be treated with the same respect. She wasn't just being questioned about her money. She was being questioned about her right to even exist in that space. And then, as if the situation weren't already unbearable, the branch manager arrived. Jessica Keller. Maya had never met her before, but there was something in the way she walked, the way she carried herself, that immediately told Maya everything she needed to know. Confidence, yes, but the kind of confidence that was built on the oppression of others. Jessica had heard the story from Mark and Beth, and without so much as a glance at the system to verify anything, she assessed Maya with a cold, judgmental gaze. "Well, sweetheart," Jessica said, her voice dripping with disdain, "this money isn't for you." The words came out like a verdict, as if Maya were a fraud, unworthy of the space she occupied. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She had been told that she didn't belong here. But this wasn't about a bank transaction anymore. This was about identity. And Maya Freeman was no longer willing to let anyone define her. Her response was clear, cutting through the tension. "Why not? This is my money." She stared straight into Jessica's eyes, refusing to look away. She had been underestimated for too long, and she wasn't about to let it continue. The whole room fell silent, the weight of her words settling in. Some customers glanced nervously at each other, as if sensing that something was wrong. But one by one, Maya's words began to sink in. The truth could no longer be ignored. The room was still, almost suffocating in its silence, as Maya stood there, her eyes locked on Jessica Keller's with an intensity that could cut through steel. The tension was palpable, the kind of weight that sits heavy in the chest, the kind that demands attention. But what was truly remarkable was not the silence itself. It was the shift in the energy around her. The moment Maya had stood her ground, refusing to be reduced to nothing more than a stereotype, the dynamic of the entire room changed. Jessica blinked, her confidence faltering for a split second. She was used to being in control, used to dismissing people like Maya without a second thought. But this time, she wasn't the one who had the upper hand. Maya was no longer the timid child they had assumed her to be. She wasn't just the black girl in their eyes. She was a person with value, with integrity, and a sense of self-worth that no one could take away. The room around them seemed to hold its breath, watching. It was almost as if, in that moment, everyone else in the bank was waiting for someone to act, to speak up, to do something that would make them feel like they were not complicit in the injustice unfolding before them. And then, something unexpected happened. One by one, the customers began to shift in their seats. The elderly woman who had been standing near the counter, the one who had watched the situation with a quiet unease, suddenly looked up and made eye contact with Maya. A faint nod, almost imperceptible, but a nod nonetheless. It was the smallest sign, but it felt like a victory. Other people, too, began to stir, their glances no longer indifferent, but filled with a kind of shared understanding. Maya could feel the atmosphere in the bank change. It wasn't immediate, but the collective discomfort was palpable. The moment Jessica had dismissed her, Maya realized she had to stand firm, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small because of the color of their skin, for every child whose dreams were questioned simply because of where they came from. Then the unthinkable happened. The door to the back office swung open, and Frederick Freeman, Maya's father, stepped into the room. His presence, calm and commanding, immediately changed the entire tone. The room that had been filled with skepticism and tension suddenly shifted, as if a silent storm had just passed. People's heads turned, and Jessica's confident demeanor collapsed into something more defensive. "Dad," Maya whispered, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. Frederick Freeman walked over to his daughter, his eyes meeting hers with a reassuring smile. "Maya, I'm so proud of you," he said quietly. But the words were more than just a father's praise. They were a reminder of everything she stood for. He turned to Jessica, his expression firm. "Is there a problem here, Jessica?" The reality of the moment hit Jessica. She hadn't recognized Maya as the daughter of the chairman. She hadn't seen that Maya's presence in the bank was not a mistake, but a reminder of who truly holds the power. And now the power dynamics had shifted, with Jessica, Beth, and Mark standing before the embodiment of everything they had misunderstood. In that moment, Jessica stammered, "Mr. Freeman, we." But the words caught in her throat. "You don't need to explain yourself," Frederick Freeman cut her off. But I do believe my daughter deserves the same level of respect as every other customer here, and I expect this to be addressed immediately." Maya, still holding her head high, looked at her father, then at the people around her. The bank, the institution that was supposed to symbolize fairness, had just failed her. But her father's presence wasn't just about authority. It was about a lesson in standing up for what's right. The message was clear. It's not about what people expect of you, but what you expect of yourself. No one has the right to define your worth except you. The way you stand in the face of adversity says more about who you are than any judgment passed by others. Maya could have let the words of Mark and Jessica crush her, but instead, she found strength in her own identity, in her own truth. As they walked out of the bank, father and daughter side by side, Maya couldn't help but feel empowered. This wasn't just about standing up to discrimination. It was about reclaiming her space in a world that constantly tried to minimize her. She had just learned that sometimes the greatest battles we face aren't fought in the grandest arenas, but in the smallest, quietest moments when we choose to stand firm in who we are. And as they stepped into the sunlight, Maya knew that the world was never going to see her the same way again. She would never again let anyone define her by the color of her skin or the assumptions they made about her life. She would be a force to be reckoned with, unapologetic, unstoppable, and forever proud of the person she was becoming.